Hello, I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore Iowa's stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today we're going to talk about a new book, Game On, Sensible Answers About Video Games and Media Violence. Youth media time is growing at an alarming rate, and there are precious few resources for parents to better understand the risks and benefits of their children's engagement with the media. We have with us two of the book's authors, Craig Anderson and Douglas Gentile. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Craig, starting with you, tell us a little bit about yourself and why this book is important.
Thanks, Peter. Glad to be here. The book, in fact, I even brought a copy so you can, hey, everybody, see the book. This is a hard copy. I personally prefer the electronic copy because of all the internal links that let me skip from one section to another. I've been studying aggression since 1979, aggression and violence. I've been studying media effects for a considerably shorter period of time, probably since the 80s, 1980s, early 80s was our first media publication. But I didn't really get serious about studying media violence effects, until about 1988 or so. One of the reasons I started studying media violence was because as an aggression and violence researcher, my students and I were in the process of creating, or at least trying to create, what we now call the general aggression model. This is a theoretical model that was intended to integrate a lot of other good theoretical models that at that time were saying kind of the same thing, but in very different language. And in the process of trying to integrate all these theories, it became clear to me that there was this huge research literature on television and movie violence that, if you're going to create a general model, it has to be able to handle that. And that's how we started doing media violence studies. And my students, both undergraduate and graduate students, got involved very early on in doing some video game studies. My initial thought was I'd do this for 3 or 4 years and then move on to something else, mainly because I have kind of a short attention span. I get bored easily. But here it is, 30 some, almost 40 years later, and we're still doing media effects studies, both positive and negative effects. So that's why we're here today.
Douglas, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I study, media's effects on kids, and I've been doing that since the 90s. And you asked why this book or why now? And I think one of the reasons is that there are a lot of really smart researchers out there doing very good research and have been since the 60s. But the problem with researchers is we sound like researchers. And parents need information in a way that doesn't sound like researchers talking among themselves. And so this book in particular has a really interesting format that it has, I think, 57 questions that parents and students might be interested in asking. And for each question, it has a 1-paragraph short answer. And then it has a long detailed answer that gets into the statistics and the theoretical aspects if you want that information. But for each question, we can give you a very simple in plain language answer. And then if you want the details, we can give you that too. And I think that makes it a really novel resource for parents.
I think it's fascinating because when we look at some of the threats that we face, and using COVID as an example, the threat manifests itself and now everybody is rushing to do research. Now this seems to be a case where there have been years and years of research, but nobody was listening. And now all of a sudden parents realize, wait a minute, there's a problem here. We see children ramping up their aggressions. We see different mental health issues. And we see this sort of fascinating correlation with video games and violence. And I'd like to explore that. If we take a short break, let's come back and sort of take a look at how research met reality, and how rich and abundant this research is, and how you've worked to make it accessible to parents. You got to stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. You don't want to miss this.
While a lot is changing in our world, at Mediacom, our focus remains the same, making sure you have the fastest, most reliable connection possible. During this critical time, we know your needs are changing. You may be working or learning from home, relying on telemedicine, or finding new ways to keep everyone entertained. If you need more speed, call or go online, and Mediacom will double your speed immediately for as low as $10 more a month for 1 year.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Right now, millions of people and billions of devices are connected to the internet. Homes, businesses, hospitals, schools. The security and reliability of these connections are more important than ever. That's why at Mediacom, we've built a network to protect them. A network that sees threats, fixes problems before they occur, and keeps you going with 99.99% network reliability.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking about video gaming, other interactions children have with the media, and the kind of violence that might be inspired. We started a conversation earlier about the research and the huge body of research that's out there, and how this book is building a connection with parents and bringing this down to a level that makes sense. Craig, can you sort of tell us how you were able to do that so that this became an understandable, plain language exercise for parents?
It's a very good question, Peter, and interesting to some of us at least. Those of us who do this kind of research very often give talks to not just other researchers, but to parent groups, various kinds. And there's always interesting questions come up in those groups. Plus, we get lots of email from parents and parent groups, and sometimes from children, adolescents, even others themselves. And what became apparent over the years is that there's really only a relatively limited core set of questions that people ask. There's the same questions come up again and again and again. In my own case, I started getting so many email requests for information that it was eating up all my time, teaching time, research time. And so I started developing some canned replies, but this, led to the, what at the time seemed like a brilliant insight that, we could compile a list of frequently asked questions and write some, prepare some good answers and make that available, easily available to a large number of people. And that would actually free up a lot of my time that's spent saying the same thing over and over again. Now I can just sort of say, hey, all these questions are answered in this book.
What's like one of the top questions that people would ask you that's covered in this book?
Well, probably the most common one has a note of skepticism in it, and it goes something like this. Does media violence really influence how children and adolescents behave? And of course, the answer is yes, it does. And it does in very predictable ways. And we've known the answer to that general question for at least 30, 40 years. That is, the field has known that. But the media industries themselves have done a very good job of keeping the general public ignorant of that fact because they see that as a threat to their profits. And so, the question still comes up. And of course, every time there's a new technological development, there's a flurry of what seem to be new questions, but aren't really new questions. Do violent video games have a harmful effect on some kids and adolescents? And of course, the new version is, does virtual reality video games have any harmful effects? And so, it's the same, like I say, the same kind of questions been coming up for a couple generations.
So you have a situation where there's an entire industry based on a sort of an addictive principle to this violence in video games. Is that correct?
Yes.
So they have a vested interest in bad behavior because that's what attracts the children? I don't know.
Well, the industry has decided, and to some extent they're right, that violence sells. Now, the reason I say to some extent is because nonviolence also sells. That is, if you prepare a really good video game or movie or TV show that doesn't have violence, I mean, those sell too. But the industry has really decided violence in particular sells, and there are some evolutionary reasons to think why that may be true. That is, we are hardwired to be vigilant to threats in the environment. And if we weren't, we wouldn't actually have been very successful as a species. So, there is something to this that, we're basically hardwired to pay attention to threats. And that makes it very easy to create, whether it's, again, TV show, movie, or in more recent years, video games that are very addictive, that constantly draw your attention back to the game. And the programmers take advantage of that. And in fact, their marketing very often is, hey, this is the most addictive game ever, as if that's a positive thing.
So they've come up with this methodology to attract kids, to make it relatively addictive. But is it, we've really grown up, even my generation, on violent movies, violent TV. Can it be construed as a pastime that's manageable, or what real effects is it having on child behavior?
Those questions, those are really at the crux of a lot of what people ask us. And there are several good answers. I mean, the main answer is, yes, it's harmful. That is, high exposure to violent media in any form increases the likelihood that that child or adolescent will choose at a later time to behave more aggressively in inappropriate ways than they would have done had they not been so heavily exposed to the violent media. Now, having said that, it's also the case that if you consider a child who has no other risk factors for violent behavior, well-adjusted, 13-year-old or 10-year-old or whatever, and you let them play violent video games 5 hours a week, that is not going to turn that child into a school shooter. School shooting or any kind of extreme behavior requires a whole bunch of risk factors of bad things to kind of converge at the same time in the same individual. So there is no one cause of school shooting. There is no one cause of violent behavior. There are hundreds. But the more of these risk factors that are present in any given individual, the more likely it is that really bad, inappropriate, aggressive, and in extreme cases, violent behavior will emerge. And media violence happens to be one of those known risk factors. It's not the largest, but yeah, it's also not the smallest.
All right, we'll take a short break.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll ask Craig and Doug, what they think the future of video gaming and media violence will look like. See you after the break. You don't want to miss this.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Right now, millions of people and billions of devices are connected to the internet. Homes, businesses, hospitals, schools. The security and reliability of these connections are more important than ever. That's why at Mediacom, we've built a network to protect them. A network that sees threats, fixes problems before they occur, and keeps you going with 99.99% network reliability.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. Video gaming and violence seem to go hand in hand. Let's take a look at this curious relationship between video gaming, violence, and children, and how a child's brain works, or doesn't work, when it's hooked on video games. Craig, we started a conversation about this, and there's this extreme where we might get something called a school shooter, which we realize involves a lot of factors. But on a normal level today, a lot of parents have raised the issue that when they talk to their children about this video gaming too much or too much violence, it can result in a fight. That children sort of protect their right to this. They feel it's something that they're entitled to. And in many respects, it sort of looks like they are sort of addicted and they're fighting any kind of parental control. So without even thinking about extreme cases where, really bad things happen, there's this sort of pervasive badness that goes along with this engagement with a lot of violent video games and violence in the media. How do you tell a parent to manage that when, in a sense, it does become a fight? That aggression manifests itself and they're wanting to keep doing this.
Yeah, one of the reasons that it becomes such a difficult fight, as you put it, is that in fact a lot of the kids are addicted in a clinical sense. Some of the studies, and Doug has been at the forefront of many of these studies, suggest that perhaps as many as 8% of youth who identify themselves as gamers are in fact addicted in the same way that adults become addicted to gambling. But so as many as 8% of gamers, and given that almost all boys and an increasingly proportion of girls identify as gamers, that's an awful lot of kids. So there is an addiction aspect to it that makes it hard to cut back. But what I tell parents to do or suggest that they try is that, first of all, when you want to cut back on what looks to be harmful behavior, harmful gaming behavior, you need to have discussions that, so first of all, are at the comprehension level of the child. So you can talk to a 14-year-old in a more sophisticated way than you can to a 6-year-old. I also recommend that people don't try to cut out games entirely, but in fact offer to substitute new games that don't have the violent content, and also new games that not only are nonviolent but aren't as fast-paced, and essentially replace some current games. And I think for many kids, if you tell them, if you can get them to understand that this is harmful to you, and let's look at equally fun but less harmful entertainment media, that doesn't necessarily make the task easy, but it probably makes it doable. For younger, parents of younger kids, I say don't let them get hooked in the first place. You have control over the video game console and everything. You get all electronic media out of private space, such as bedrooms, and put it into public space so they can't sneak out and you know, be playing these games when you don't know about it. But if you start off with a proper media diet, a healthy media diet, then you're much less likely to get into that place where it seems like it's nothing but a big argument, and it's very uncomfortable for everybody.
And now, Douglas, you've done research, and you've also noted that in the past, when we've had you as a guest, that this is now clinically defined as an addiction, video gaming. So even our medical community now is dealing with this as a health issue.
Yeah, the World Health Organization last year identified gaming disorder as a bona fide mental health problem. And to pick up on what Craig was saying, what we're trying to teach kids is to be able to manage their time and attention appropriately. I like to think of, as a good analogy, giving children an allowance. Why do we give children a monetary allowance? It's not because we believe children deserve money. It's because we want them to learn the value of the money. So when you first start your child with an allowance, say when they're 5 or 6, what do? They spend it all the minute you give it to them on candy. And then the rest of the month, they're sad that they don't have any money left, right? And over time, they learn to not spend it all right away. And then they start learning how to save it for something they want. And by the time they're 18 and they move away, hopefully they've learned the skills that they can manage their money on their own. So that's the value. If we gave kids a screen time allowance, they can have 10 hours of entertainment time on whatever device they want. When you first give it to them, they're going to blow it all in one day, maybe. And that's okay. And then they're going to be sad the rest of the week. And again, then by the time they go off, to college or go live on their own, they're not spending 60 hours a week on video games because they've learned how to keep it in balance. They've learned how to manage it. And is it a fight? Yes. And is it worth having the fight? Our research shows yes. That when parents do set appropriate limits on amount and content of children's media, it's a powerful protective factor for children. Those kids get better sleep, lower risk for obesity, better grades in school, more pro-social in their behaviors, less aggressive in their behaviors. This one simple thing of setting limits on children's media is beneficial in many areas of their children's lives.
Well, I think that it sounds like your book is a really good investment for parents to help their children make the best out of their lives. We'll take a short break, and I'd like to invite you both back to share some final comments, some advice, and give parents a reason to go out and get your book so that they can help make their kids' lives better and healthier. We'll see you all after the break. You don't want to miss this.
I don't know how we would have survived without Mediacom. We have 5 kids, my wife and I, and we have Mediacom for all of our internet and all of our cable services. So I'm stuck in my house, but at the same time, I'm connected to people all over the world, and it's been fantastic.
Thanks to Mediacom, I've had reliable internet to continue to work business as usual so that I can continue to provide for myself and my family.
Right now, we all feel like the world is in a standstill. The internet has played a huge role in allowing us to stay connected to our jobs and the kids' schooling online and finding fun and creative ways to stay connected with the ones that we love. We couldn't do it without Mediacom.
Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're talking about a book for parents on video games and media violence and some ideas about what's really important when it comes to raising your children. Let's see what our guests have to share with us as advice. Craig, what do we want to leave our viewers with? People raising children, raising young children, what's important for them to know, and why should they get this book?
The book is designed for multiple audiences, including especially parents. The book will help you learn how to make good choices for your children, not just about media, but more broadly, the kind of things that kids need to be doing to grow up healthy. How much time should they have on media? How do you wean older kids off of harmful media and into more useful, beneficial kinds of media? We answer a lot of those kind of questions in this book. And again, it's very, very important. And of course, one of the things I tell people is that for very young children, they shouldn't be viewing any screen media whatsoever. 2 years or younger, there's really no reason for them to. Instead, what they really need is parent-child interactions, reading stories to them, showing storybooks, naming things. That is really lays the groundwork for a successfully developing child.
When we talk about media today, we're not talking about yearning for the good old days where everybody sat around the porch. We're really talking about sound science saying that to understand how to raise children today with media constructively, you need to have these lessons. You need to know the answers to these questions.
Yeah, every parent wants to do the right thing for their kids. They just don't always know what that is. And here's where the science is so useful. It really helps us to be able to focus in on what media are really beneficial for kids and what media aren't as much. And even the things that aren't really beneficial, it's kind of like candy. It's not like you're saying children should never have candy. We just want to make sure that they're having it as a small part, as a treat in a broader healthy diet. And so understanding the science that we lay out in our book, Game On, allows parents to make choices such that they can maximize the benefits and minimize the harm of media on their children.
Thank you so very much for joining us today, and thank you for watching the show. You can go to our website, healthyiowa.org, for more information about the book and other things that may interest you. Keep your eye on Mediacom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore Iowa stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. On Mediacom MC22, your local programming leader.